FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Cory Lutz, and well, you know, there's a lot of vice. There's a lot of corruption going on. There's a lot of crime. The question is, what should be legal? What should be illegal? What is the state's role in regulating its citizens' behavior, whether it comes to sex work or light drugs, soft drugs like marijuana, or hard drugs? What should the state be doing? Well, there's an argument out there to decriminalize basically sex work. Some of you might otherwise know it as prostitution. And there is an argument to be made. We'd like to know your opinion. Why don't you send us an email to kl@corylutz.com and let us know your thoughts. So with me now is Kaytlin Bailey. Kaytlin, you are host of the popular podcast, The Oldest Profession. And hey, you know the second oldest profession, don't you?
No, what is it?
Second oldest profession is probably politician. The third oldest profession is being a gold miner. But in any event...
I think there's too high an opinion of politicians.
Yeah,
they're not that necessary.
Well, hey, well, you know, there's a lot of parallels to be drawn, isn't there? So your contention here, sure. Your contention here, and we've seen it actually pop up in these Democratic debates of, you know, basically, I don't know if the Democratic Party is becoming libertarian. They want to legalize everything that they like and criminalize everything that they don't like. But Sanders and Warren have both come up in the affirmative of decriminalizing sex work. But look, there isn't really much to be done at the federal level in this regard, is there? It's not really a federal issue.
Well, we actually have 2 asks on a federal level. The first thing is I don't think it's the government's business to interfere or intervene in consensual sex happening between 2 adults, whether there's money exchanged or not. I think that is at best a waste of our law enforcement resources that could be being used to track down serial killers and serial rapists and the men that hurt women that target sex workers. I think that's the way that we can bring law and justice into sex work. But on a federal level, we would ask that Congress or congressmen renounce their support of SESTA FOSTA and appeal that bad law if they can. SESTA FOSTA was signed into law in April of 2018 by Donald Trump, and it essentially censored spaces on the internet that sex workers were using to schedule and screen their clients. And it suddenly made sex work exponentially more dangerous overnight. And we've seen an increase in deaths in the sex work community since the passage of that law. It was dangerous, and it had exactly the opposite of its intended effect. And the second ask on the federal level is I would ask our politicians to write incentives or create boundaries and encourage the federal money that is being used to combat human trafficking in this country actually going to help victims instead of putting them in handcuffs.
Well, so let's talk about it. You raised the issue of human trafficking. This is a huge problem worldwide, especially in the United States. It's been going on a long time. Long time.
It's a direct result of criminalization, because when you create a black market, that creates spaces for violence and exploitation and abuses of power in a way that decriminalized and legalized industries just don't have. Even at my worst waitressing job, my manager was never going to hit me.
Yeah, well, what you're saying, there's some validity to, but much of the human trafficking that takes place deals with younger people, younger than the age of consent, who really aren't in a position to make these decisions. At what age do you need to be that you can make the choice? What's your feeling on it?
I mean, I think across the board, we see places like New Zealand, the age is 18, like a legal adult as defined in this country. I mean, if we decriminalized adult consensual prostitution, we're not legalizing child rape. That's not something that anybody is advocating for. In fact, we're freeing up law enforcement resources to actually target those individuals instead of going after consenting adults.
Okay, so...
Because right now we're wasting... Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so why not just legalize it?
Legalization is a dystopian nightmare that only benefits brothel owners. It's essentially a legal system that allows the government to use the power of the state to force people into brothels. Now, sex work is a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Some people work 1 hour a week. Some people feel like they work all the time. Some people want to go to a place and have a manager and have scheduled calls and then be able to go back to their life and not think about it. And some people want to be entrepreneurs. In legal, regulated systems, if you want to work as a legal prostitute, you have to register with the state. In Nevada and Amsterdam, where you have to get a card issued by the government that you pay for that puts you on a list that is often used against people in child custody cases or prevents them from being able to own property years into the future. This is a stigmatizing list. It forces them to give half of their money to a management staff that is historically male. It's not sexually empowering. It's like turning the government into a pimp, really. And I don't think that's something that anybody wants. We don't want to be policing people's individual sex lives. We want to stop arresting people for that. That's the goal, not to erect, state-sanctioned brothels. That's a nightmare. Nobody wants that.
Yeah, well, so you give the example of Nevada, where it's legal. Mm-hmm. You could say in... Nevada is the only place in the country with legal prostitution. It has the highest arrest rate per capita for prostitution. This is not a place that has stopped arresting people for the oldest profession. It's simply created new forms of tax revenue. Well, because the arrests, most of them take place, correct me if I'm wrong, are in Clark County, where prostitution is still illegal.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like a county by county decision. The rest of the state, seems to be functioning.
In the early 1970s, it was a compromise that brothel owners made with state legislators that no county in Nevada with a population more than 700,000 can have a legal licensed registered brothel. But the places with the highest demand obviously have the highest population. So the largest segment of the sex work industry in Nevada, well over 90% of it, happens outside the legal regulated brothels.
Right. So then there's only one county that had over 700,000 residents, and that was Clark County.
Mm-hmm. They're spread out throughout the state, and they're different. It's a complicated system of state law and county law and city law, and then individual brothel management preference that all kind of conspires together to disempower workers. Well, so it's not something that I'm advocating for, and it's certainly not something my organization is advocating for. Well, legalization is very different from decriminalization.
Well, the point is, though, that health can be monitored and taxes can be paid, fees can be collected, whereas decriminalization, you don't really have the ability to do that, and you can't have your cake and eat it too. It's either okay or it's not.
No. You're absolutely wrong about that. I worked as a stand-up comic for almost a decade, traveling all over this country, getting paid in cash and drink tickets and paychecks from 11 different states in 1 year. Freelancers in this country, if they make above a certain amount of money, they pay their taxes at an incredible rate. Sex workers are not immune to the pressures of the IRS. We live in the world and are in the system. Our assets can be seized just like any other freelancers. And so sex workers are absolutely already paying their taxes.
No, maybe yes, maybe no, but there is the health issue. You want these people.
Yeah, absolutely. People are more likely to seek healthcare when they know they won't be arrested for telling their doctor what they actually do. Well, every place that we've seen decriminalization of sex work, including Rhode Island, between 2003 and 2009, saw a dramatic decrease in STDs. In fact, gonorrhea in the state of Rhode Island during the 6-year period that indoor prostitution was decriminalized, saw a reduction of gonorrhea by 40%.
Mm-hmm. Well, so let's go back to this concept here that somehow legalization is injurious, whereas decriminalization isn't. Mm-hmm. So there are different licensing schemes. There isn't just one that it only is acceptable for brothel owners. Why shouldn't the state be controlling this to be sure that protect the safety of the public and the workers?
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Financial Survival Network is brought to you today by Oren Resources, a junior exploration company with the appetite of a major. It's hot on the trail of the next globally significant discovery, creating enormous potential upside for you, the shareholder. Oren is one of the most aggressive exploration companies pursuing high-grade, scalable gold and copper deposits, and has a premier 7-project portfolio, including its 2 flagships, Committee Bay in the Arctic and Sombrero in Peru. Oren's unparalleled technical team and highly experienced management has a history of success in advancing and monetizing exploration assets. No wonder Oren's been called one of the best in the junior exploration sector. Oren trades on the TSX and the NYSE under AUG. To learn more, go to orenresources.com. That's AURYN resources.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Yeah, I think that New Zealand has the most elegant solution to this, which is that if you're an individual proprietor, meaning, you're not working with anyone else, then you don't have to register anywhere. It's just like people can have lemonade stands. Like it's not something that you have to register for a license for, or you can, do babysitting. There are lots of informal economies in the mainstream world that are not criminalized, right? So if you're an individual proprietor, you don't have to get a license. But if you have more than 4 people working cooperatively or in the same location, they have to register for a license for a brothel in New Zealand. And that's very similar to any small business, right? Like, Steve Jobs didn't have to register as a business owner until he had a few employees. But once you have a few employees, there's a process that you go through to declare yourself a business. I don't think that sex work should be exempt from that. I just don't think that we need a whole new segment of law code to, create bureaucratic barriers between people who want to do butt stuff with each other. Like that seems like a waste of resources and a bad use of our government's time.
Yeah, and that may well be the case. But look, there's decriminalization of marijuana, and then there's legalization, of which I think we're up to 10 states now, maybe 11. And clearly, I would say that the legalization there is the way to go. So, why should this be even the subject of criminal law? Because
marijuana is a product and sex work is a service. That's the major difference. The reason that you had to legalize marijuana is because it's a food and a drug. It has to, we have the FDA. We have a lot of reasons to regulate marijuana. It's a consumable product, but sex work is a service ranging from something resembling a back massage to something resembling a magic show. Like there's you don't become licensed to become a performer. So it would be an intrusion into the deeply personal lives of our citizens. And I think it's something that the whole of the American public ought to proactively resist, because if you can criminalize sex work, you can surveil every adult sex life in America.
Look, when you're talking about services, there are scores of services that are licensed and regulated. Stockbrokers, taxi cab drivers, whether they should be or not is another story. Hairdressers, manicurists, those are all services. Massage therapy, okay? All services.
Right, babysitting.
So why some of them are regulated, some of them are not? But why does sex work deserve an exemption from any type of meaningful regulation?
Because as much as sex work is work, it is also sex. And I think that when you have licensing procedures, what you are tacitly doing is criminalizing a broad range of harmless activities, consensual sexual contact between adults. And I think that when you invite the kind of government surveillance into that and you try to criminalize it, you inevitably do more harm than good.
Well, we can agree to disagree on that topic, because any behavior that should be decriminalized should be legal, because it can amount to the same thing as de facto legalization. And that's really what you want here, is de facto legalization without any of the burdens of legalization. And, there's a lot of service workers out there, the Uber drivers, they've got to get licensed. You want to drive a car, you want to be a taxi driver, you got to get licensed. So in any event,
it's exactly the opposite, though, because it's cab drivers that had to pay exorbitant city license fees, and it's them that's getting pushed out by Uber that is famously actually not participating in the labyrinth-like licensing system that places like New York City had.
In certain places. In New York, they've got to go through the Taxi and Limousine Commission.
Right.
The point being here,
it's like $500,000 for a cab light, or it was until Uber came around and changed all that.
My only point is, if you're not going to prosecute, then make it legal, because otherwise you're doing the same thing, but you're just not calling it that. You are calling for legalization because decriminalization in the absence of prosecution is legalization. It's just de facto. It's not by law, but it is effectively legalization. So let's just call for legalization of prostitution, period, and leave it to the states to figure out how they're going to regulate it, if they're going to regulate it or not. And maybe we should not regulate it at all, which is basically what you're calling for. But we need a discussion about it and a weighing, and that's what our legislatures are supposed to be doing. So once prostitution is legalized, what comes next? What else do we need to legalize or decriminalize?
Well, our organization's first priority is to stop the arrest. And I think that there'll be a state by state, community by community, coming up with solutions to problems that are presented when you stop arresting people for engaging in consensual sex with each other. So I think that each community will come up with its own solution, but let's stop the arrest first and then come up with solutions together, listening to sex workers as members of our community.
So that in most major cities, prosecution of prostitution is not a priority. Yes, it happens, arrests happen, but the police, it's not their major priority. When you get into smaller...
tell that to the 19 women that were caught up in the Robert Kraft sting that are currently facing multiple federal charges.
Well, that is a smaller city. I happen to live right by that town, the town of Jupiter, a smaller city. Larger cities, they do have a public morals division, a vice division, if you will, but generally that is not the hot seat of the police activity. New York City, you just have to go through there and you see that the police don't care. But
just 2 years ago, a young woman named Yang Song, she was working at a massage parlor in Flushing, Queens. And she'd immigrated here with her husband, and they started a business together, but he got sick. And because it was a small family-owned business, he got sick and the business failed at the same time. So after his death, she found himself working essentially at a brothel in Flushing. And when the NYPD broke in, she threw herself off a third-story window rather than be rescued by the police for the second time. So I understand that you think that this is not an emergency, but people in my community are dying because of these raids. Their lives are being ruined. They're being kicked out of places. They're spiraling into poverty and homelessness. And it needs to stop. This is an injustice happening in our country. We are spending millions of dollars hunting people for the sex that they're having.
Yeah, well, I think it should be legal. As a libertarian, I'm pro-legalization of many things that are currently illegal. What the federal government can do, they've persecuted some websites who offer sex services, but for the most part, it's not a federal issue. It is a state issue. But
it is a state issue.
And I'm not so sure that the actual exploitation of women is coming about from as a result of its criminalization. Now, one thing, what about streetwalkers? Should every town and city across the country open up their sidewalks to streetwalkers?
Every place that sex work is decriminalized, you see a reduction in in street walking. That is a direct result of criminalization. If people were able to advertise on the internet and schedule and screen their clients, they can get that off the sidewalk. We made alcohol safer and better in our communities by stopping the arrest. We made marijuana safer and nicer to have in our communities when we stop the arrest. We can do the same thing with sex work. The reason that we associate sex work with criminal activity is because it has been criminalized for over 100 years. There's nothing inevitable about that.
On the lower levels of sex work, prostitution,
you're always going to have survival. Survival sex is always going to happen. There's no way to stop that.
You got a lot of drug abusers, a lot of people resorting to sex work to feed their habits. I mean, that's not at all unusual. The two seem to go hand in hand. How do we stop drug addicts? Because they're probably the riskiest population for the customers. How do we keep them out of the mix?
Desperate people do desperate things. If you don't want people doing things they otherwise wouldn't to get their survival needs met, you have to meet the survival needs. So if you want to get people that are struggling with substance abuse out of sex work that they don't enjoy, that is a compounding trauma for them, then you need to build more places for people struggling with substance abuse to go to seek non-judgmental harm reductionist care.
Well, it seems to me that it seems to be conducive, lowest common denominator. Everyone has a body that they can sell when they're desperate. And if you have no regulation of this field, then you open it up and you basically just allow people here who are really zombified, for lack of a better term, than otherwise. But hey, the debate will continue.
Yeah, I think what's actually true about what you said is that all of those consequences are the direct result of criminalizing an entire industry and creating a black market. If you take this industry out of the shadows, you reduce all of the harms that you just listed.
And I'm totally in favor of it, but legalize it so that you can screen these people out. We don't want drug addicts. We don't want it street walking, street business. Don't want it on the streets. Not healthy for a community. It attracts the drug dealers. It attracts a decline in these areas. I don't think decriminalizing it is going to really help address that issue. I think legalization.
It addressed all of those issues when it was decriminalized in both Rhode Island and New Zealand. And there are Olympic-sized pools worth of academic ink spent on both of those places, examining exactly those trends.
Yeah, well, needless to say, the U.S. is a little different than New Zealand, and a smaller population, less urban decay. I don't know for sure about Rhode Island. It's cities, smaller state, cities not in as profound a state of decline as many other places, like in Chicago, and you could just name the city. But I think the debate needs to be had. Appreciate you coming on. So just tell us where we find your work at here, Kaytlin.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. If you want to hear more about decriminalizing sex work, visit our website at dswork.org.
All right. You'll find a link to it in the show notes to this interview. Questions, comments, email us kl@carrylutz.com, Twitter feed @carrylutz, Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. Kaytlin, thanks so much for coming on. Be well.
Thanks for having me.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.